recording.
And we're back.
We're back for part two. Hopefully the state buys this. We'll see. Okay. So Jill, we had you cut off there, unfortunately. I think we were just rounding that we kind of had some questions slash commentary.
Okay.
So we do have another 40 minutes, which I think will be ample time for us. So maybe we can now slow down and be a little bit more methodical. But swinging back, I think we're basically, the commission had a consensus on thought and approach here, seeing the dynamics between a full exception, but also observing the precedent that we have within the downtown, given the code and what it is. I did see that there were some questions that were kind of lingering in there. So if we want to restate, if there are outstanding questions, we'll just restate them now. Jump off there.
I think my outstanding question, which is just more my own lack of understanding, maybe, is sort of the longer term implications or plan for parking requirements in the downtown area based on all of the dispersed parking and other improvements and the very finite amount of space that's actually available. If it makes sense to continue to use the same calculations that we're currently using when we know that it's not feasible to create new spaces and will force payment in lieu or special exception requests to be granted for pretty much every circumstance that we see as businesses are shuffling in and out of Main Street properties. So yeah, just sort of like a bigger picture of will there be an end to the cycle, or kind of a rethinking around parking requirements downtown based on more of the downtown master planning that's happening.
Sure. And so that's a question that will really be pushed to maybe this body as well as city council of the future of how we'd like to organize our plan. Downtown master plan, as well as our coordinated master transportations plan, how all that factors in. There's 2 points to that question I'll jump in on. One is, are we adjusting calculations? In fact, the answer is yes. So as even a part of this code update, we're not looking at maybe larger parking issues or other offset development standards, i.e. put in 20 bike racks in the place of 1 vehicle space, and we'll call that a draw or whatever it might be, to try to push for a more multimodal forward, give you that opportunity to do that. I think that's something we do want to do, but we're not looking at now. But what we are looking on to do, and this was something we've established for a while now, and it might ring some bells, is our current code requires a maximum payment in lieu of 30%. I believe that if you go way back to the Jailhouse Cafe parking exception, which was the original precedent-setting case, in my opinion, that was actually brought to the city manager saying, hey, look, our code's broken, is projects in the downtown, when they're changing to such a scale, there actually becomes an administrative gap in for a project to have to go through the process. They're basically beholden to a discretionary option. So for me, the cap of 30% is actually the problem. I would cap it, and I had discussed this with the former city engineer, that we almost reverse that, where you would have an administrative meeting. Yes, it goes to a public hearing, and I don't know why that is, because it's not necessarily discretionary. It's you pay it and then it's done. So it's not like we're having a discretionary discussion. But is that we flip that you could pay for up to 70% or 100% of your parking. It makes that administrative. If you're willing to pay for it, you shouldn't have to be weighed in on a thoughtful planning commission or not so thoughtful planning commission that could kill your project. So making things administrative as much as possible versus discretionary is a very powerful mechanism that we'd be going. So that is the change I'd be wanting to make almost more immediately, is change the percentage, not the overall formula. The second piece of that is we've seen a lot of these going through. To me, that says the code's actually working. We've granted a number of exceptions. We're getting payment in lieu. That means the code is actually working well for these subjective situations, in that we're in an adaptive refill and adaptive use, adaptive use or infill, excuse me, condition within our core. It's built out. So now we're changing uses of the existing or maybe secondary, maybe tertiary uses of the core. We're in this whole new growing pain of we're no longer, that building was built for this. Now it makes sense to be something totally different, but the development standards are different. So for us, if we believe the parking code is accurate, which we should believe that, I'm not sure it is right now. So that's something we should look at. We should stand behind this use puts a impact on the community of this many parking spaces. That has to be observed somewhere, whether that's a municipal parking garage or that's more dispersed parking. Those people have to park somewhere within our community. And maybe at some point we'll find the parking calculations can be reduced because of multimodal options for transit, or a more walkable core where we're focusing, yeah, you're staying in a hotel and maybe you are walking more. So the next step I think would be for us to evaluate our parking calculation requirements, which are not terribly sophisticated, which we've talked about with some folks, is a double-edged sword. For some people, it's unsophisticated in a way that is actually very advantageous for them. For others, it cannot be. Restaurants in particular, there's a lot of, or eating establishments, a lot of space that is not really being accessed by people that is necessary for operations versus like retail, there's just people that could be everywhere. So maybe that one's particularly accurate or advantageous. But eating establishment, you're actually parking for, or maybe here's the one, hotel and overnight accommodations. It's a one parking space requirement per room. That has no accommodations for employees, additional amenities, any other staff, or multiple vehicles per room. So they have probably the most advantageous parking requirements. So their side of the scale is actually tipped in a crazy way. So we have been talking about, now I've got my 40 minutes, I'm really going to start talking, is with the building code occupancy. And this is often with architects, we struggle because they are trying to calculate off of kind of occupancy designations of a space, meaning for an architect or occupancy requirement for the building code, they're not saying this, a bathroom, for instance, or even a storage closet. They're like, people aren't in there. So it's not going to count toward their occupancy calculations. But for planning, the way we have it, it doesn't matter. Floor area is floor area. We're not designating how it's being used. So that's a sophistication that we'd like to make. It could make some people's parking calcs worse. It can make a lot of people's parking calcs better. So we are looking into doing that. But I would kind of believe right now, if we're going to continue to say parking can't be accommodated in the court, which I think is your point. That's kind of what you're getting at. It's already built out. There's nowhere to put parking. Why are we making people go through this effort of parking? Well, if we have a 3-story building of where there was only one, and we say, oh, there's no more room to put parking, we should just waive it. Well, all that occupancy, all the parking in theory that would go there has to go somewhere. And the fear is if we're not allocating it either on off street, meaning on the private properties, it's going to come into the public realm, which will likely bleed into adjacent areas or even adjacent zones. So for that matter, Moab, if it says we build out everything 4 stories, which we can't right now, but if we did, and we didn't change anything in the parking situation, all that parking is going to start bleeding out into the residential zones. And now we're going to have a different type of parking issue. Unless, of course, it becomes so that you kind of let the free market take care of itself, is people are like, well, parking's a nightmare. I'm just going to ride my bike. A lot of communities have just opted to let free market's not quite the right term, but let the free market or how the capitalistics of economics work take care of it for themselves. They're just like, we're just not going to require stuff. Businesses will fail on their
Let
own.
parking be a nightmare, and
then there'll be less parking, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of pain to get to that point, and that's a question of, do we want our community to go through such pain that there's consequences that end up reducing our parking requirement versus trying to plan well. And so the fee in lieu is actually, for me, a really great tool, especially right now. The fee for a parking space is easily half what it would actually cost to install a parking space. But that fee for new business owners in particular is a huge capital expense up front that maybe they're not. And I think in this situation, we're seeing that it, whether it can be accommodated or not, might make or break it to begin with. But where do we draw that line of that fee that we're collecting is it's a marked fee. It can only go back into parking for the community. It's not like we can go take it and plant trees with it or do something else. It can only go back into transit in some way. So the theory is if you can't accommodate on site, we'll take that money and go put it where it can make sense or into a pilot program or multimodal dispersed options. So for me, the fee in lieu, it's half of what it should be. And we're putting it into service. It's going right back into the economics of the community that we're creating parking for the people that can't do it themselves because of the constraints of private realm. So that's my bigger argument on parking as it stands now. I think there's definitely room for sophistication, definitely room for amendments, and then a larger, more comprehensive view of parking and transportation in the core. But for me, I feel the code's actually working because we're using it and people are getting through and approving. So I hope that was 3 comments I was trying to capture. I hope that captured them. Maybe not fully addressing your question, but
No, that was helpful, and I appreciate the you bringing in the additional context and kind of these things are on our mind, and we've identified more opportunistic moments to address those in the future because I think it is worth addressing, and whether it's making space for the more sophisticated calcs or looking harder at how the calcs are aligned with different use cases or potentially even being more agnostic about the whole concept when specifically looking at the downtown corridor within a set sort of area of Main Street and one block out or something. So yeah, good conversations for the future. Less directly relevant to you all tonight, so thanks for the patience. But yeah, thanks, Corey.
Yeah. I'll note that there are a couple communities specifically in the Pacific Northwest. They've just abandoned their parking code. Say nope, we're not talking about it. You can put parking, don't put parking. We're not regulating it. It's been installed now for a little while. So if the commission's interested or the public's interested, it may be worth looking at some of those communities as case files. If the commission requests and we ever do look at it, I'm certainly going to be bringing those case studies and some of the testimony from those to see what the consequences were, positive, negative, otherwise, to see, again, kind of that agnostic approach of, well, okay, y'all figure it out. There's some real beauty to that, but also I know there's also some tumultuous conflict around that. So,
but in regards to the current item on the table, obviously there is room for a little bit of sophistication and change with how we handle parking here in Moab, and especially as we take that money and we fund parking projects and we have more parking downtown, we can begin to look at it differently. But in the case we have on our hands here today, at least myself personally, I feel like it is too large of an exception to make outright with that because of the precedent we've maintained with everybody else. And the fact that this is an administrative decision, I feel like maintaining that precedent makes the most sense. However, I personally am in support of allowing them to count the 5 parking spaces that are accessed through that. It's not technically an easement. It's technically Wells Fargo's property, but it has to be maintained open for fire reasons, or
I'll try to
help me with that.
A lot of legal discussion here, but essentially there's clearly a prescriptive use. I think the way it was kind of phrased. There are utilities in that alleyway. There is clearly public access. There's clearly some private ownership access. I mean, the garbage truck travels down these routes, whatever it is. But prescriptive requires an adjudication, somebody to go and pursue that and get a judge to confirm that acquisition of or dedication of property. So the city has not, thank you. This was an exhibit provided by the applicants that's showing kind of more or less the alleyway. It was brought up that in the code we have defined that alley is a acceptable right of way option for us, or for a combination of right of way and meaning public right of way and private property ownership. But this alleyway has not been cured legally. So there's allegedly kind of this water main that we don't have full easement for. There's a lot of private properties that are overlapping with this that they don't have easement for. In this example, there's clearly parking there that there's not legal title or legal access to it. So it's not this property's fault that this alleyway is historically a mess. And that water line's been in there since, what was it? Before the 50s. It's been in there a long, long time. One of the first water mains in town.
But in some degree, functionally, nobody's going to be erecting a building or a wall or something that would prevent them.
It would likely interfere with all this prescriptive. That's when the prescriptive push. So when prescriptive right usually only comes in for that adjudication when it's about somebody's about to build over the top of my only access. Well, now I'm going to go fight for that. So as long as everyone's playing nice, the cost it takes to actually get that adjudication
kind of
is just like, well, everyone's
limbo.
playing nice. We're not going to pursue that at this time. So it's a complication around Moab in general. We just have a really old town that was handled kind of loosely for generations. So us having to pick up the pieces now makes it really complex.
And frankly, the applicant mentioned that they have an understanding with Wells Fargo or
Right.
the owner of that property.
Right.
And so it makes perfect sense to me to include those 5 spaces as part of the parking calculations, meaning they only need 6 spaces total and would be paying 30% of 6 instead of 30% of 11.
Right. So we'll still grant the exception for the
essentially 4 parking spaces because it
would be 9. Because in theory, if we were to require payment in lieu, we would require 2 spaces. And then the 9 would still require
an
an
exception.
exception. So you're still granting exception for 9, but you're paying the maximum of 30% for the reasonable spaces. If we said, hey, we're, what could be a little bit more firm is, no, you have to pay 30% of all 11 that don't really exist. But as we can clearly see, there's some parking there that does exist. It's just we could not grant that some sort of entitlement of real because it can't be legally accessed. So to not double down on what is already a difficult situation, staff, and it's a discretionary action. Payment in lieu is also discretionary, maximum of 30. We're recommending less than the 30%, but with the justification that it's 30% of what is the actual burden on the community. Maybe we can look at it that way. The 6 that are going to go somewhere else, they're going to, I think the dispersed parking absorbed, but that's what's really challenging about dispersed parking is that we have everyone trying to claim, well, there's all this dispersed parking. And as it was pointed out, there's like 6 spaces in this particular section. Well, yeah, but we also have Wells Fargo, Marriott, Sotheby's. Everyone's competing for those same spaces that also don't have any parking. So we can't say, oh, yeah, there's 6. It's a clear offset of these 6. It's shared common parking. But clearly, the increase in parking is sufficient downtown to a degree that if we're saying 11 new spaces are coming online, could that be absorbed into the downtown? And I think the answer we've recently been saying is yes, that can be absorbed without creating a burden somewhere else.
It is also good to know that the payment in lieu funds are specifically earmarked for improving parking in and around the city versus something that we collect and then gets used elsewhere.
Right.
Parking and transit, right?
Parking and transit.
Yes, parking, operations, and maintenance. I think it's profiled in the agenda summary somewhere where it has. Maybe it isn't. But it is in the sections that we're identifying where it talks about the criteria and where that fee in lieu goes. And we didn't, that's why, is this item, we're not talking about fee in lieu tonight. We're talking about a full exception.
Okay.
If the planning commission decides, we're going to deny this item, but we do want to see it next planning commission on Thursday, we'll set the public hearing to set that all up so that we can have the dual combo, which is what we've had in the past. Like we were teeing up for Wabi Sabi most recently, where they would have this dual approval. But yeah, in the code, it breaks down specifically what those funds have to be used for. But more or less, it is parking, transit, operations, and maintenance. So it kind of gets a little loose of what does that mean? Well, we don't really have any of that except for our pilot program. So, but more or less for us, that's going to go directly back into probably dispersed parking.
Okay.
There was also some question I think that came up in one of our previous conversations about exactly how those funds are tracked, because they're amongst the general funds more or less.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, another opportunity for improvement.
Yep. And this was something with the previous finance director we've talked about when identifying this. We don't have an account set up specifically for this like we might with, say, the Wahoo Assured Workforce Housing Ordinance. It has a separate account just for that. So we'd have to do that. The tracking ultimately will be there in paper, but it'd be sure nice to have its own account separated. We up until the last year haven't had any funds coming in, so there was no reason to have an account. But now that we're seeing the community really start going through this growth spurt of redevelopment, it's starting to make sense of, no, we're getting these almost every other meeting, these types of requests. So definitely, I think the impetus for us to start that would be now.
Jill, anything more on your end?
No, you guys are covering it really well. You're asking all the right questions. So, yeah, so our meeting is only to do the exception. Is that correct? I just want to verify that.
Only to do the exception for the full 11 spaces.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Shall we entertain a motion? We may have one more comment from our applicants. If you
Totally.
just come up to the
Yep.
mic and, yep, thanks. We've got Eve taking notes, so
Hopefully.
yeah, theoretically, or she'll rewatch it and take
She'll-
notes. I feel like is how that works.
She'll have to watch the recording. Yep, because we're not streaming. Hopefully.
I just wanted to ask if I could add one more thought thought piece to this. Just listening to everything that you guys have been saying, and I wanted to add, I understand and appreciate completely code and the fee in lieu. Considering where we are, I would be curious, and I don't know if this information is readily available. I think of what we're doing more in lines of like Sabaku 98 Center, Singha, Michoacana, like those same restaurants or similar use, and how we would compare to them. I know Wabi just went through this. Obviously, it's different business style versus Main Street. Just knowing what it is like to operate a business on Main Street, and that foot traffic is a guarantee, versus trying to grow this off Main Street community and encourage businesses to be able to survive off Main Street, is really part of the request in the full exception. I would also say being sandwiched in between businesses that do have quite a bit of parking. I did ask Wells Fargo if that would be a possibility to lease spaces from them or request a shared parking situation. That was denied. There is a lot of parking like right next to us and right behind us. I think we're just one of the businesses similar to these other ones I've mentioned that just don't have it on the property at all. I just wanted to mention that.
Absolutely. And thank you very much. And that is something I guess that I note is like because the parking comes into question on a change of use, it can be essentially more burdensome for small businesses trying to step into a new building, such as like, developing off of Main Street. And if this building had already been a restaurant, they would have already done the fee in lieu or whatever they needed to do to acquire the parking. And so with it not being a change in use, it would not be a financial burden on the new business trying to move in there. And the way that code is written, to me, it would almost make sense if either every time somebody moved into a space, regardless of the use, that they would have to deal with parking, or that if the space itself, like, and I mean, I guess this kind of rounds out to what you were saying, is like downtown already has some dispersed parking. And while everybody, like Corey was mentioning, everybody's trying to claim a little bit of that, if there was an understanding that there was some kind of metric where, depending on how many spaces you were next to that we had already built in a dispersed parking or whatever, that those would count towards your parking count. And all that, I think, is something that we are considering and trying to make sure that as downtown grows and as we grow off of Main Street, that it is something that's accessible to someone with a small business moving in and not having to, deal with massive fees in regards to all of the different licensing, things like parking that they require. But to that note, like, while our code is being adapted and changed and we're always trying to do better or be more equitable, as it stands with the code we're working with now, and with the question of fee in lieu versus a full exception, I don't like, Jill had spoke. Did you have anything else to add? Because I guess if we're, did anybody else want to make a motion, or?
Is it, are we, well, we're, based on all kind of our discussion, and it seems where folks' heads might be at, but we don't know until we vote, is, would we deny the motion for approval related to the resolution or the parking special exception request in terms of language?
The way I think this is how Joanna and I structured it for tonight, and then we didn't have time. I think we talked to Rebecca, and also with our previous applicant Bonjour, they did something similar where they're like, no, we want to ask for the exception. We're not coming with the fee in lieu as a back pocket option. So with this resolution structured as full exception, so we don't have an option for fee in lieu or have an alternate motion or amendment. So it's either approve or deny, or approve with modifications, but you could not add the modifications for the recommended, the recommendation from staff, and that we would have to renotice for the public hearing. So that was something we were kind of half anticipating, depending on how tonight went, noticing this coming Monday so that we'd be prepped for the 27th, I think, so that we'd be teed up to get that public hearing and then readdress basically the same discussion at that point. Yeah, your option before you are basically approve or deny. The modification would be something we'll factor that in. So that's not so much of an option tonight.
Got it. But we wouldn't be denying the planning resolution. We'd be denying the parking special exceptions request.
The planning resolution is specifically tied to the special exception request.
So it doesn't matter.
It won't matter. It's same. Yep. The request and the resolution are the same thing, or state the same thing. So this resolution would have the commission accepting the full exception request.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and make a motion. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission deny planning resolution number 05-2025, the planning resolution approving the parking space parking special exemption request for 11 parking spaces for the press eating and retail establishment change of use on property located at 35 East Center Street, Moab, Utah, 84532. With my follow-up comment being, I really like the idea of what's happening here, and I really want to be in support of our local businesses. And I understand that for some small businesses, it is harder to come up with the fee in lieu. But from the fact that we are an administrative council or commission, and that we are being asked to look at the precedent we've set with everyone else, I would love to see you guys come back with a mix with the fee in lieu included. I would be more than happy to, I would like to see the 5 spaces that are kind of in limbo included in that, because I think finding that middle ground and allowing you to credit those spaces, even though they're kind of in legal limbo, but still have to go through the process we've asked of everyone else who's come before us, feels like the most equitable way to approach this. As just to stick with precedent, I think is the fairest way to go. Any further discussion? Or?
So that was a motion. We'll see if we can get a second. If we don't get a second, motion dies. If we do get a second, you can also have additional discussion before the roll call or call.
Thanks for keeping me on track.
You're doing awesome.
I'll second the motion.
And now typically it'd be the person that made the motion and the second can have an option for discussion, and then barring that will go open, which is just Jill in this case, if there's anything else. If not, then we can have a vote.
Frankly, does anyone else have anything, Jill, or you, to say about this motion?
No, I just wanted to also second your comments, Miles, and to the applicant team that I think everybody on the commission is really excited about your business plan and how you've been so intentional to bring in so many beloved local businesses and protect space for Desert Thread and, respect the historical nature of the building. So we're really hopeful. I think the conversations that staff have had with you about this kind of creative middle ground that we can strike, where we're minimizing the burden to the extent possible while making sure to be fair across the cases that have come in front of us, will hopefully work in your favor to a certain extent. And we all really want to see you succeed and are excited about the business idea and the space.
Jill?
I agree.
Shall we do a vote then, if there's no further discussion?
Yep. And we can just do an all in favor, don't need a roll call.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to deny?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, that's a unanimous vote in favor of the motion to deny the planning resolution.
So to dovetail into that, I'm anticipating we'll move forward with the applicants in generating a public hearing. Obviously, we'll get determinations from them, but we'll work with them on what that calculation might mean and what the final findings will be coming before you. But we'll anticipate that coming on the 27th. I think there are no other pieces with the item, so I just want to once again say thanks to the applicants. You were real sports with a very long and cumbersome meeting, but really appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much, and we are excited to see that happen. So future agenda items, I think, is next.
I'll look over to staff and have them pick back up. So obviously, we'll have.
You do have 4 minutes.
We do have 4 minutes, so we're gonna be right about. The press coming for a public hearing for fee in lieu and parking exception, very likely at our next meeting. I've been saying this and I have not heard from the applicants. I am just waiting for Lions Back phase 2 to come before you guys. It's possible if they were to submit tomorrow, it's possible we could see you by the 27th, but a 2-week turnaround for full submittal like that is becoming unlikely. So we may not see them until April, if they were to submit tomorrow, type of a thing. I might look over to our other staff. We have a number of level ones, a number of changes of use, a lot of things that are just skirting kind of either past you or lower. And I think we did talk about that there's a hillside development ordinance for a property that would be located just south of the Hyatt Place. That includes you on 2 levels. You'd be an advisory body for the hillside development piece, and then a land use authority for the development scope. We're in kind of preliminary discussions with them right now, so I'm not sure we're quite there for March, probably for April. Anything else that you can think of?
Not that I.
Okay. All righty.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your patience. Eve, for your patience with all of our weird technical difficulties. And I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting at this March 13th meeting at 7:34 p.m.
Thanks, everybody.